Hey guys, Leanna here. It's Tatas Tuesday, and I was going to take you guys through this report on cyber violence against women and girls and talk about it and show why it's biased against gaming and video games and all that stuff. Um, because there's been so much discussion about whether mean words on the internet constitute violence. And, you know, it's an important issue. We need dialogue. There's no way one report can be, the final word on this subject. Unfortunately, I can't show you the report because it has a disclaimer on it that prohibits reproduction of the document without express written consent of Major League Baseball. You can see it right here. I'm not even supposed to be reproducing this, but I wanted to show you guys proof of what I was saying. It says right there, no part of this publication may be reproduced by any means whatsoever without the prior authorization of Broadband Commission co-vice chairs or UNESCO. So this leaves me in a bit of a pickle. On the one hand, feminism's trendy right now, so groups from all over are making a hash out of it, and I'm trying to give people the real facts so that people can understand what feminism really is and not, let the dialogue be controlled by a bunch of bandwagon jumpers. But I can't talk about the report itself. So what I'm going to do instead is give you guys some background regarding the body that commissioned this report, the timing of the release of this report, and things connected to that to help people contextualize. And so hopefully this video helps establish some background. Now, to be clear, I have no inside knowledge of the intents of this report. I'm making these comments based on what I know of how global politics tends to work. I used to work in hard news. So that's what I'm doing here. This is not intended to be any insider information. This is just my opinion. Okay, disclaimer over. Because I think the timing of this report is no accident. Okay, 2015 is a significant year at the UN. It's the year that this thing called the Sustainable Development Goals has begun. Now, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Sustainable Development Goals have replaced the Millennium Development Goals, which were set to expire in 2015. Now, one of the things you see the Millennium Development Goals Gap Task Force report. That was basically a report. You can read it. Again, it's got the same damn disclaimer on it. But that was basically a report, and it dealt with how difficult it was to actually track the Millennium Development Goals they set out, like quantifiable measurements. What they found was that monitoring was a real problem. They couldn't measure things they were supposed to be using as benchmarks. But what the report determined was that despite these holes, despite the problems, they determined that setting goals were a useful tool for sort of lifting the quality of life for people around the world, especially when it came to, alleviating extreme world poverty, right? So we now have the Sustainable Development Goals. The new target is 2030, and the number of goals involved, come on, mouse work. The number of goals involved has expanded from 8 to 17. A lot more. But this, obviously, there's a lot more new things in. But one of the things that carried over was what's now known as Goal 5, a commitment to achieving gender equality, and empower all girls and women. Now, remember, this is a global goal. Okay, I think we can all agree that there's work to be done globally to end the severe oppression of women in certain parts of the world. Now, what some people have issues with is, oh no, it's just far away places. Those of us in North America think it's actually not. It includes marginalized girls in, the first world. I don't think we're supposed to call it the developed world. In Canada, we have issues like, the missing, murdered Aboriginal women issue. There's been thousands of Aboriginal women murdered or gone missing, and the crimes have never been solved. And it's to the point that many people believe it's a systemic social problem as well as a criminal one. The other I could think off the top of my head is an issue involving women and girls is this fringe community that jumped from Quebec to Ontario. You may have seen it in the news. It's a fringe group called Lev Tahor, which is nicknamed the Jewish Taliban here in Canada. The government, child services, things like that, claim that Lev Tahor denied proper schooling to girls, forced female teenagers, possibly as young as 14, into marriages to older men, and other things like women were not allowed freedom of movement. They had to wear these burqa-like garments. And again, this was happening in Canada, not some developing country. So issues involving women and girls don't just impact faraway places. And that's an important thing for people to be aware of. Things like that can happen here. Okay? And I'm just talking about this because Canada is my country. I'm sure there's similar things that are going on in the US. I'm just not as big an expert on that. And I like to talk about things that I can, really, really understand. But back to goal 5. Under goal 5, a series of targets was identified, goal targets. You can see them all here. Okay, here we go. Quite a few under 5. Now, these targets were this whole thing about we have to be able to measure things, right? Now, once a set of goals like this is established for one of these 15-year arcs, all the various subcommittees at the UN all scramble to get heard, and they start polishing up their own agendas to sort of maximize the appearance of applicability to these priorities. And one of them was the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. The Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, for people who don't know, it's a joint initiative by one part of the sort of offshoot of the UN called the International Telecommunications Union, and UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So it's two subgroups of the UN. And its stated purpose is to promote the deployment of high-speed, high-capacity broadband connections to the internet as an essential part of modern infrastructure. And this Broadband Commission was added as part of, the previous Millennium Development Goals. The commission was founded, you can see it here, in May 2010. Okay, that's a really new committee. The only thing it's really managed to produce is reports. Now let's recap. Do we see internets anywhere here? Let's go. No, go back. Want to see. Okay. No poverty. No, that's not internets. Hunger. No, that's not internets. Good health and well-being. That's not internets. Quality education. Maybe. Okay. Internets. Here. Quality education. I can see this being something here. Gender equality. Not internets. Clean water. No water. Affordable and clean energy. If you read about some of the stuff that goes into computers, it ain't that clean. Decent work and economic growth. They can make a case here. Innovation and infrastructure. I would think they'd be all over that. Reduced inequalities. That's something different. If you want to read them, go ahead. Sustainable cities. No. Responsible. No. Climate action. No. Life before water. Well, my cell phone's waterproof. Life on land. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. Maybe. Partnerships for the goals. I think this is where they're trying to sort of connect goal 5. And basically, there is no sustainable development goal that says because internets. So we have a situation where we have this, UN body fairly new, and it doesn't really have a place it fits nicely. And these things don't come out of nowhere. So I want to show you guys something, okay? This was in 2011. The original set of 4, what they called ambitious but achievable new targets that countries around the world should strive to meet in order to ensure their populations fully participate in tomorrow's emerging knowledge societies. Okay, making broadband policy universal, making broadband affordable, connecting homes, getting people online. It wasn't until 2013, and this is almost hilarious, just this image, that they added gender equality. So they've only been in the business of really focusing on gender for 2 years. Okay? 2 years. Now, there's an issue here. Obviously, issues that seem like first world problems are going to get less attention at the UN than solutions to like extreme gender inequality issues like acid attacks, forced child marriage, female genital mutilation, and the denial of even basic education to women and girls. All things that happen around the world. So, when you have this goal 5 thing, there is pressure to find some way to make, mean things done to women in the middle class seem like give it some sizzle in the face of, making sure people don't go hungry and eradicating poverty. You can see here one of the goal 5 targets, 5.2, is eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres. Ding, ding, ding. All forms of violence. And so we have cyber violence. Never mind, there's a whole bunch of other things that are targets under gender equality and women's empowerment. Violence has sizzle. Okay, so they've got their angle. But the challenge for the report was to frame the things that happen online as a unique challenge to women, something they've only been paying attention to for 2 years, and something that actually impedes participation and overall well-being. Okay, overall well-being. And, based on the timing, landing in 2015, being flashy and digestible by the media, by including someone who's been on a pretty major media tour of late, that doesn't hurt. It's a media game. But again, this isn't a commission on women and girls. This is a tech committee. And this is something I find a bit odd because the UN does have a committee for women's issues. It's called the Commission on the Status of Women, and it's been around since June 21st, 1946. So it's been around a long time. I've read papers by the Commission on the Status of Women, and I really, if you guys have the time, please read a few so you can see the difference. Because one of the major things that got me about this report that I can't show you is it didn't actually rely on established evidence. The Pew Research Center did a massive study in 2014 that actually broke down. I mean, this has been quoted all over the place. And it studied 6 different forms of online harassment, some which were criminal, some which were not criminal. And what they found was that there were different types of harassment, but young women, and it's an issue of intersection between a youth issue and a women's issue, which is very, very interesting. But young women, meaning women between the ages of 18 to 24, experienced particularly severe forms of online harassment. So you can see here that the lesser harassment, that, being called a liar and you suck, happens to, it's obviously the largest form of internet harassment, happens to men slightly more often than women in being called offensive names, purposely embarrassed against slightly more often to men than women. Did I say women than men here? Men than women, I apologize. But when you get to the more serious forms, stalking, sexually harassing, physically threatened is the one that happens slightly more often to men than women. But 3%, we know what 3% is. That's the margin of error, right? Sustained harassment is the same way. But look at stalking. It's way up for women. And sexual harassment's not illegal, but also way up for women. Now, the nice thing is that the serious forms of harassment are a clear minority of cases. Okay? But there is an issue when it comes to the really serious stuff that will put people off the internet, make them go, forget this. It's not something, stalking is not something you can just block and ignore. Stalking is serious. It's the same thing if you're physically threatened. It's the same thing if the harassment is sustained. And I'd call that almost even 2% difference, I'd say that's pretty much even until we get another study, until we get a trend. I'm not willing to say this is more or less. But this is evidence. This is evidence of an issue. But instead of relying on this Broadband Commission paper included citations in the report that were opinion columns and blogs. And obviously, this isn't best evidence. You can't form policy on opinion columns and news blogs. So what's going on here? Believe it or not, it was Anita Sarkeesian that I think made the most pointed comment in her remarks to the Broadband Commission regarding what Anita pointed out was that the reality is these issues we're seeing online are transplanted issues from the real world. They didn't start online. Go and look at her talk. Go and look at her talk. It's only 2-3 minutes long, but she actually says that these things don't start on the internet. And it's incredibly ironic that Anita Sarkeesian, of all people, would be the person claiming that digital media isn't the source of the problem. But in this case, she's right. You guys all heard that, right? I said Anita Sarkeesian was right about something. So, the next time one of the haters says I'm just jealous of her, point them towards this video. She's right in that the internet is a reflection of larger world gender issues, some of which we brought up here. It's not the source of them. Okay. And because of that, I think moving forward, women's issues should be handled by the organization that's existed since 1946 for the purpose, not a group that woke up to these global issues 2 years ago. Now, granted, it didn't exist until 2010, but I would at least like to see co-authorship. The Commission on Women should be involved in this, because this report just comes off as an apparent attempt to maintain relevance. And in trying to maintain relevance, the U.S. Broadband Commission showed they're woefully out of touch regarding the issue of women in technology, especially when it comes to video games. But again, I can't show you the report. So here, have an adorable otter.